I'm Ethan Marshall, the sheriff of Bend, Oregon, a 47-year-old guy who spent most of my life chasing down troublemakers from cattle rustlers to petty thieves, but nothing prepared me for the mess that landed on my doorstep one crisp Saturday morning. I live in a small cedar-sided house in Cedar Hills, a quiet neighborhood tucked against the foothills of the Cascade Range, where the air smells like pine and the sunrises paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. My place isn't much to look at, just a cozy 2-bedroom with a wraparound porch, a handmade wooden mailbox I carved myself, and a long bench where I like to sit and watch the world go by. It's my sanctuary, a spot where I can escape the chaos of my job and just breathe. I've been at this for 15 years, dealing with everything from bar fights to lost hikers, and I thought I'd seen it all. And turns out I was wrong. That morning, I was settled into my routine, sitting on the porch with a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand and the local paper in the other. The headline was about a new hiking trail opening up near Mount Bachelor, and I was already planning a day off to go check it out. My deputy, Bennett, had been bugging me to take a break, saying I was working too hard, and for once, I was actually listening. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and let out a contented sigh. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of a few birds chirping and the distant hum of a lawnmower, and I glanced at my mailbox, a little lopsided but sturdy, and smiled to myself. I'd spent a whole weekend last summer carving it, and even if it was perfect, it was mine. Same with the bench on my porch, a simple pine piece I'd built with my own hands. I'm no carpenter, but I like making things that last. Just as I was about to turn the page, I heard a loud bang on my front door, the kind of knock that sounds like someone's trying to break through rather than get your attention. I froze, my coffee halfway to my mouth, and listened as the banging came again, even louder this time. I set my mug down on the porch railing, my good mood evaporating, and stood up, brushing off my jeans. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not someone who sounded like they were about to kick my door in. I walked over, my boots creaking on the wooden floor, and opened the door, ready to give whoever it was a piece of my mind. What I saw on the other side stopped me cold, and for a moment I thought I might have stepped into some kind of prank show. 3 guys stood on my porch, all dressed in what looked like cheap Halloween costumes, trying to pass as uniforms. The leader, a wiry man with short, badly dyed blonde hair and mirrored sunglasses that screamed dollar store, stepped forward, puffing out his chest like he was about to storm a crime scene. His 2 buddies flanked him, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else, their polyester shirts wrinkled and their badges so shiny they had to be plastic. The leader, who I'd later learn was named Gary Walsh, held up his badge with a dramatic flourish, like he was starring in a cop movie. "Sir," he said, his voice deep and overly serious, "we need to speak with you immediately. You're in violation of multiple HOA ordinances, and we're here to issue a citation." I stood there, one hand still on the doorknob, and blinked at him, trying to process what I just heard. I've dealt with some wild situations in my time, like the guy who tried to rob a gas station with a water gun, but this was on a whole new level of ridiculous. "HOA ordinances?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Gary straightened up, clearly enjoying the moment, and announced, "We're with the HOA enforcement unit. I'm Officer Walsh, and these are my associates. We don't tolerate non-compliance in this neighborhood." His associates nodded in unison, one of them clutching a clipboard like it was a shield, the other fumbling with a pair of handcuffs that looked like they'd snap if you sneezed on them. I crossed my arms over my chest, leaning against the door frame, and let a small smirk tug at the corner of my mouth. "The HOA has an enforcement unit now? Since when?" Gary lifted his chin, trying to look imposing, but the effect was ruined by the way his sunglasses kept slipping down his nose. "Since the board decided we needed to maintain order," he said, his tone dripping with self-importance. "Now step outside, sir. We have some citations to issue." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A short, sharp sound that made all 3 of them flinch. "Citations for what exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how far this charade would go. Gary reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, unfolding it with a snap. like he was presenting evidence in court. You've been cited for an unapproved mailbox design, he said, his voice full of fake authority. And unauthorized porch furniture. I stared at him, then glanced over at my mailbox, the one I'd spent hours carving, and the bench I'd built with my own two hands. My mailbox, I said, pointing at it. What's wrong with it? One of the lackeys, a scrawny guy with a clipboard, piped up, reading from his script. It doesn't conform to the HOA's latest aesthetic guidelines, section 4, subsection B, line 12. I turned to my bench, which was just a simple piece of pine, and raised an eyebrow. And my porch furniture? Gary hesitated, glancing at his clipboard, then back at me. It's unapproved, he said, like that explained everything. I rubbed my jaw, trying to keep a straight face. So, let me get this straight. You're here to find me for a mailbox and a bench? This isn't some kind of prank? Gary's face turned red, and he stepped closer, his voice rising. Non-compliance with HOA ordinances is a serious matter, sir. You'll be paying a fine, and if you don't cooperate, we'll have to take further action. I tilted my head, my smirk fading into something harder. Further action? Like what? The scrawny lackey with the clipboard stepped forward, holding up his flimsy handcuffs. We'll have to detain you if you refuse to comply, he said, his voice shaking a little. I looked at the three of them, standing there in their fake uniforms, trying to act tough. And I felt a mix of amusement and irritation. I've spent my career dealing with real criminals, people who'd rob you, blind or worse. And now I've got these clowns on my porch threatening me over a mailbox. I took a slow breath, deciding to play along a little longer, just to see how far they take, it's you. Detain me, huh? I said, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind me. And where exactly are you planning to take me? Gary squared his shoulders, clearly thinking he had the upper hand. To our compliance center, he said, his voice full of smug satisfaction. I couldn't hold back my laughter this time. A compliance center? You mean to tell me the HOA has a jail now? What's next, a court in someone's basement? I was about to tell them to get off my property when Gary made a mistake. He stepped forward, grabbing my arm, and said, "Enough talking. You're coming with us now." All right, I'd had enough. In one smooth motion, I twisted my arm free, grabbed his wrist, and spun him around, pinning him against the side of their beat-up SUV parked in my driveway. He let out a yelp, his sunglasses falling to the ground, and I held him there, my grip firm, but not rough. You just made a big mistake. Pal, I said, my voice low and steady. The scrawny lackey dropped his clipboard, and the stocky one froze, the handcuffs dangling from his hand. I reached down to my belt with my free hand, pulling the small radio I always carry, even on my days off. I pressed the button, sending a silent distress signal to my deputies, all while keeping my eyes on the two lackeys. You might want to stay right there, I told them, my tone leaving no room for argument. Gary struggled against my hold, but I've got years of experience on my side, and he wasn't going anywhere. What the hell are you doing? He sputtered, his voice muffled against the car. I'm performing a citizen's arrest, I said, a hint of amusement in my voice. You just tried to assault me on my own property. That's a crime, in case you didn't know. Yeah, the lackeys looked at each other, panic written all over their faces, and, I could tell they were thinking about running. But before they could make a move, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance growing louder by the second. Within minutes, 2 squad cars pulled into my driveway, lights flashing, and Bennett stepped out of the lead vehicle. He took one look at the scene, me holding Gary against the SUV, the other two standing there like they'd seen a ghost, and raised an eyebrow. Boss, you mind telling me why you're wrestling with a guy who looks like he raided a costume shop? He asked, his voice laced with amusement. I let go of Gary, stepping back and brushing off my hands. These 3 were in the middle of trying to find me for my mailbox and bench, I said, nodding toward the porch. They even threatened to detain me, figured I'd save them the trouble of doing it the hard way. Bennett let out a low whistle, looking at the trio. All right, let's see some IDs, he said, his hand resting on his duty belt. Gary straightened up, trying to regain his composure, but the fight was gone out of him. There's been a misunderstanding, he said, his voice shaky. We're with the HOA enforcement unit. We were just doing our job. Bennett plucked the badge from Gary's chest, turning it over in his hands. It was so poorly made, I could see the plastic edges from where I was standing. He looked at me, then back at Gary. This is a joke, right? He asked, holding up the badge. I smirked, shaking my head. I wish. Bennett turned to the trio, his expression hardening. All right, let's start with some real names and real IDs. And don't even think about running because I'm not in the mood for a chase this early in the morning. I watched as the three of them reluctantly handed over their wallets, and I knew this was just the beginning. And something told me there was more to this than a few guys playing dress up. And I was going to get to the bottom of it one way or another. Bennett flipped through their IDs, his eyebrows climbing higher with each one. Not a single one of these guys is a registered security guard, he said, glancing at me. No certifications, no training, nothing. They're just some random guys in uniforms. I nodded, not surprised. Figured as much, but I want to know who put them up to this. They didn't come up with this scheme on their own. Bennett turned to Gary, who was rubbing his wrist where I had him pinned, his sunglasses now dangling from one ear. Start talking, Bennett said, crossing his arms. Who told you to come here and play cop? Gary hesitated, his eyes darting between me and Bennett, but the fight was gone out of him. It was the HOA board, he said finally, his voice low. Victor Langston, the president, he hired us, said we'd get a cut of the fines if we enforced the rules. The stocky lackey jumped in, his voice cracking. He told us it was all legal. We were just supposed to scare people into paying. I exchanged a look with Bennett, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't just a few guys playing dress up. This was a full-blown racket, and Victor Langston was at the center of it. He cut the fines, huh? I said, my voice steady but cold, So you've been going around the neighborhood, finding people for made-up violations and keeping the money? Gary nodded, looking down at his feet. We didn't keep all of it, he mumbled. Victor took most of it. We just got a small share. Bennett let out a low whistle. So, sounds like fraud to me, boss. What do you want to do with them? I stepped back, letting Bennett take over with the cuffs. Detain them, I said, my mind already racing ahead. We're taking them to the station, but first, I want to see what's in that SUV. If they've been collecting fines, there's got to be evidence. Bennett nodded, handing the trio off to the other deputies who'd just arrived, and we walked over to the vehicle. It was a beat-up old SUV with an HOA sticker slapped on the side, the kind of thing you'd see at a community event, not a law enforcement operation. I pulled open the driver's side door while Bennett checked the passenger side, and it didn't take long to find what we were looking for. Inside the glove compartment, there was a stack of ticket books, each one filled with handwritten citations for things like unapproved mailbox color and excessive lawn ornaments. There was also a small cash box stuffed with crumpled bills and a ledger that listed names, dates, and amounts. I flipped through it, my jaw tightening as I saw the numbers. They've been hitting the whole neighborhood, I said, holding up the ledger for Bennett to see. Hundreds of dollars from each person, sometimes more. Bennett pulled out a phone from the center console, scrolling through the messages. And look at this, he said, showing me the screen. Text from Victor Langston himself, telling them who to target and how much to charge. This guy has been running a whole operation. I took the phone, reading through the messages, and felt a surge of anger. Victor Langston wasn't just some overzealous HOA president. He was a crook, using these fake cops to extort money from his own neighbors. I've seen a lot in my time, from drug deals gone wrong to bar brawls that ended in broken bones. But this kind of petty, calculated greed made my blood boil. We're going to have a little chat with Victor, I said, pocketing the phone. But first, let's see what the neighbors have to say. If these guys have been shaking people down, I bet there are plenty of folks with stories to tell. I walked over to the edge of my driveway where a small crowd of neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the sight of three guys in fake uniforms being cuffed and loaded into squad cars. They were whispering to each other, some looking nervous, others curious. I raised my voice, making sure everyone could hear me. Folks, I'm Ethan Marshall, and I need your help. These three have been going around finding people for made-up violations, claiming to be HOA cops. If they've done this to you, I want to hear about it. For a moment, there was silence, and I wondered if they were too scared to speak up. But then an older woman with a gray bun stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. They fined me $200 last month, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Said my flower pots were too bright, and if I didn't pay, they'd report me to the city. A younger guy in a baseball cap spoke up next, his face red with anger. They charged me $300 for having a barbecue in my backyard. Said it was an unauthorized gathering. I paid because they threatened to double the fine if I didn't. More voices joined in, a chorus of frustration and outrage. They fined me for my kid's tricycle being in the driveway. I had to pay $400 because my fence was the wrong shade of white. I listened, my heart sinking with every story, but also feeling a fire building inside me. These people trusted the HOA to look out for them, and instead, they were preyed on by a bunch of con artists in fake uniforms. I turned to Bennett, who'd finished securing the evidence from the SUV. We've got enough to start with, I said, my voice low, but I want to talk to Victor Langston. He's the one pulling the strings, and I'm not letting him get away with this. Bennett nodded, a grim smile on his face. I'll get these three to the station and start processing them. You want to handle the HOA board yourself? I nodded, already picturing the look on Victor's face when I showed up at his door. Yeah, I'll take care of it, but first, I want to make sure these folks know they're not alone. I turned back to the crowd, raising my voice again. If you've paid any fines to these guys, keep your receipts. We're going to get your money back, one way or another. The crowd erupted in cheers, and I felt a small sense of satisfaction. All right, this wasn't over yet, but I was just getting started. I drove to the HOA office in the center of the neighborhood, a small building with a sign out front that read, Cedar Hills Homeowners Association. Word had already spread, and when I walked in, the board members were waiting for me, looking nervous, but trying to put on a brave face. Victor Langston, the president, stood at the front, a tall man with slicked back hair and a suit that looked like it cost more than my truck. Cost more than, as he clasped his hands in front of him, forcing a smile. Now, Ethan, he said, his voice overly polite. This is all a misunderstanding. We were just trying to maintain order in the community. I crossed my arms, my expression hard. A misunderstanding? You mean the part where your fake cops tried to fine me for my mailbox, or the part where they've been extorting money from everyone in this neighborhood? Victor cleared his throat, his smile faltering. We've had complaints, he said, gesturing vaguely. People expect a certain level of decorum here. I cocked my head, not buying it for a second. Complaints about what exactly? Mailboxes and porch furniture? A woman with short blonde hair, another board member, spoke up, her voice sharp. We have to enforce standards, Ethan. People buy homes here because they want a certain aesthetic. I fixed her with a hard stare. And does that aesthetic include hiring unqualified thugs to shake down homeowners? The woman stiffened, her face turning red. They were volunteers, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled out the fake citation book from the SUV, holding it up for them to see. Volunteers who were charging fines, threatening arrests, and pocketing cash, I said, my voice cutting through the room. That's not volunteer work, that's fraud. The board members shifted uncomfortably, and Victor tried to salvage the situation. Look, maybe we got a little overzealous, he said, his hands raised in a placating gesture. But surely we can handle this internally. There's no need to involve law enforcement. I let out a low chuckle, stepping closer. Too late for that, Victor. Your boys are already in cuffs, and we've got plenty of evidence. If I were you, I'd start thinking about a lawyer. Victor's smile disappeared completely, and the blonde woman sniffed, her voice rising. This is outrageous. Like, it's that the HOA has operated this way for years. I gave her a hard look, my patience wearing thin. Yeah, well, that ends today. By the time I walked out of the office, the board members looked like they'd just been certificated a death sentence. I knew they weren't going to get away with this, not if I had anything to say about it. And back in the neighborhood, the scene had turned into something of a block party. People were out on their lawns, chatting animatedly, swapping stories about their own encounters with the fake cops. Some were laughing, others were fuming, but there was a sense of relief in the air, like a storm had finally passed. An older man in a fishing hat approached me, his face lit up with a grin. "Ethan, I got fined $200 last month for excessive yard decorations," he said, gesturing to his lawn, which had nothing more than a bird feeder and a small garden gnome. A younger woman stepped up next, her voice shaking with anger. "They charged me $300 for parking my car in my own driveway overnight." Another neighbor groaned. "I had to pay $500 because my grass was 1 inch too high, and they threatened to double it if I didn't cut it within 24 hours. I shook my head, promising them, "Y'all are getting your money back one way or another." The crowd erupted in cheers, and someone even popped open a soda and handed it to me, which I accepted with a grin. Bennett wandered over, looking amused. "This might be the first time I've seen an investigation turn into a community festival," he said, taking a sip of his own soda. I smiled, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease. "People love seeing justice served." Bennett held up a file, his grin widening. "Well, you're about to love this. Just got word from the prosecutor's office. They're looking into felony fraud charges against the whole HOA board." I raised an eyebrow, a spark of satisfaction igniting in my chest. Now that's music to my ears. Bennett flipped through the file, his expression turning serious. "And it gets better. We checked the HOA's financial records. Guess who's been skimming money off the top?" I leaned in, already knowing the answer. "Don't tell me." Bennett grinned, confirming my suspicions. "Your buddy Victor Langston. He's been pocketing thousands, and a chunk of that money was going right into those fake cops' pockets." I let out a low whistle, shaking my head. Well, looks like we're going to be making another set of arrests. It didn't take long. Within hours, Victor and his accomplices were being hauled into squad cars, looking every bit as stunned as the fake cops had been. The neighborhood residents gathered to watch, some even clapping as the handcuffs clicked into place. All right, justice was being served, and it felt good. As I leaned against my truck, watching the last of the arrests, the older man in the fishing hat wandered back over. "Ethan, you ever thought about running for mayor?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. I laughed, shaking my head. "I think I'll stick to what I'm good at," I said, giving him a wink. "But if I change my mind, you'll be the first to know." He chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder. "Well, you've got my vote either way." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. All right, I just wanted to get back to my quiet life, but I had to admit, seeing the neighborhood come together like this made it all worth it. And the days that followed were a whirlwind. I made sure every resident who'd paid those fake fines got their money back, working with the prosecutor's office to track down every penny. And the HOA board was dissolved and a new one was elected with strict rules to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. And the story spread through local news, even making it to a few papers across the state. And I started getting calls from other communities dealing with similar HOA problems. They wanted advice or just to thank me for showing them it was possible to fight back. I even got an offer to join the city council, but I turned it down. I'm happy where I am, doing what I do best, keeping the peace and making sure folks can live without fear of being bullied. One evening, a few weeks later, I was sitting on my porch, the same bench those fake cops had tried to find me for, watching the sun dip below the Cascade Range. The mountains were glowing with that golden light I love, and the air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a while. The neighborhood was different now, quieter, but in a good way. People waved at each other more, stopped to chat on the street, and there was a sense of trust that hadn't been there before. I'd helped make that happen, and it felt good, even if I'd never been one for the spotlight. So here's my message to you, the folks watching this video. If someone tries to take advantage of you, whether it's an HOA, a bully, or anyone else, don't let them. Stand up, speak out, because you've got more power than you think. It's not always easy, and it might get messy, but it's worth it. Share the story if it made you think. Talk about it if it made you mad, and keep fighting for what's right if it inspired you. Real change starts with real people standing together, and I've seen it happen right here. I'm Ethan Marshall, and this is my story, a story of fighting back, one fake cop at a time.